Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the City Lifestyle Committee of the 2nd of December 2020. I declare this meeting open at 9 o'clock a.m. I note that Councillors Raven, Kerensky and Bradley have submitted a leave of absence request due to their attendance at committal hearings. Oh, sorry, tripping over my words already. I'd like to advise meeting attendees that this meeting is being audio recorded. I note that Councillors Raven, Kerensky and Bradley have submitted a leave of absence request due to their attendance at committal hearings. Do any other councillors have a leave of absence to declare? There being none, I now move a motion that Councillors Raven, Kerensky and Bradley be granted a leave of absence in accordance with section 5.3(c)(3).
Second it.
Sorry?
I'll second the motion.
Oh, okay. Of the Local Government and Committee Meeting Code. Is there a seconder for the motion? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do any councillors wish to speak to the motion? I now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. The motion has been carried unanimous. Councillors, we start this morning with an overview of the red imported fire ant eradication program in 2020. I will now refer to item 4.1. Can the City Standard and Animal Care Manager, Mr. Shane Mansfield, please enter the discussions?
Thank you, councillors. I'd like to welcome Mr. Graham Dudgeon to committee today. Graham is the...
Sorry, I just have one more. Before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? Thanks for your patience. There being none, I now refer to City Standard and Animal Care Manager to open public discussion. Mr. Shane Mansfield, you may now proceed.
Thank you, councillors. I'd like to welcome Mr. Graham Dudgeon to the committee today. Graham is the General Manager of the Red Imported Fire Ant Eradication Program. He will be attending today to provide a presentation on their 10-year eradication program, the program's activities, a little bit more specific to the City of Logan, and also the role of council emerging in this overall program holistically. Please welcome Mr. Graham Dudgeon. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks everybody for having me here this morning. It's a really important topic to bring council up to date with what's happening with the program. Our war against fire ants has been going on for a long time, and I think some of you have been involved for many of those years, others it might be relatively new to you. So this is bringing everybody up to speed and specifically to talk about council's role in the fight against the fire ants. So just a bit of information about what this fire ant problem is. So fire ants are one of the worst, most invasive pests in the world. They're referred to as a super pest because they seem to have been bred to invade everywhere on the globe. They are in many, many countries. Australia is the only country that has been able to eradicate any fire ant incursion. They've been in the US for many years. They cost the US many billions of dollars a year. People die in the US, and it's estimated that more than 20 million people a year are stung by fire ants in the US. They're in China, they're in Taiwan, they're in many other countries, and that pressure is on our borders because we could have more incursions, and we have recently had a new incursion in Western Australia at the Port of Fremantle. Luckily it was caught early at the port, and that is the best place to catch them. What can fire ants do? They can kill people, they can kill people's pets. They have the ability to cause an anaphylactic shock because of the toxin they inject. They normally will not just sting someone once, they'll sting someone many, many times. They swarm on whatever their victim is, and one of the ants will release a pheromone that tells all of them to sting at the same time. So that's why they're so bad in terms of that danger to people and animals. They can kill small livestock, and they can bring small ground-dwelling native animals almost to extinction if we don't do something about this problem. They certainly will affect people's lifestyle. This committee is about lifestyle. The lifestyle of people in Queensland, in Australia, relies on us being able to live and play outdoors. It's pretty difficult to do that when you're going to get stung everywhere you go. I've seen videos in the US where people go and get washing off the line with buckets on their feet so they can prevent themselves being stung with fire ants. They cause damage to agriculture, they cause damage to infrastructure. It's been estimated in Australia, if we don't control them, if we don't get rid of them out of this country, they will cost this country in excess of $1.65 billion per year. So the investment to eradicate them is well worth it. In fact, the investment up to now, which has been roughly $400 odd million, we get a return on that investment every 2 years because we've contained the fire ants to a relatively small area. And I'll go back one. So this slide essentially shows you the fire ant incursion with its current size. So this is the southeast Queensland fire ant incursion. We've had another half a dozen others which we have eradicated. So that little blue area is where they currently are. It looks little on this map. It's quite large. From an incursion perspective, it's about 600,000 hectares. Those coloured semicircles are where fire ants would be now if we hadn't been fighting them since 2001. So we have contained them to only a few % of the area that they could be in. And it's very important to understand that. We haven't eradicated them yet. What we have done is we've kept open the real possibility of eradication, and scientists tell us that they can still be eradicated. So how are we doing this? With such a large invasion of fire ants, it's a massive invasion of fire ants, and in fact, how did they get here in the first place is probably a good place to start. So they were found in 2001 in Richlands, and it was found at that time that they'd been there for quite some time. It's just that's the first time they were reported. They were reported through the Queensland Museum. The surveillance that was done in the first year after they were found in 2001 found they had already spread to 35,000 hectares. So it's not as if we got them in the beginning. So we started off behind the 8 ball, and that's why it's such a big thing for us to deal with. Yes, they have spread further than where they were back in 2001. And people say, they're out of control, we've lost the fight. Well, what we've done is managed to minimise the spread, minimise their march further out from where they were at that time to less than 10% of the rate of spread that there is in other countries. You cannot 100% contain fire ants. It's important to understand that, but you can minimise the spread. If we slow the spread down so that they spread to much less area than we get them out of, that's the eradication equation. It's a simple thing. Get rid of them out of a greater area than they move into, and you'll eventually get rid of them. What this plan we have is a 10-year plan. So this is a national eradication program. It's not a Queensland one, it's a national one. It just happens to be the incursions in Queensland. All jurisdictions, all territories, the Commonwealth are chipping in money, and they're behind us and supporting us to get rid of these fire ants out of this country. It's essentially a regional extinction of a species. That's what we're talking about. It's the biggest of its kind in the world, and it's the biggest of its kind in Australia's history. So we're not saying it's not difficult, it's difficult. But we have to go about it in a way that's quite different from what a normal small invasive pest incursion would be. So we've chopped up the area into pieces. So you'll see in this map, it's chopped up into what's called 4 areas. And the strategy is to start in the west. Why are we starting in the west? Why haven't we started in the middle, which is where they first started, and in fact I'll show you a slide later that shows where the greatest incidence of fire ants is because once they get into the cropping areas in the west, it's really hard to do something about them. We would have to close down agriculture for a number of years in the Lockyer Valley and parts west of there if we were to deal with them if they got that far west. As it is, cropping is a difficult thing to get fire ants out of. So we've spent the first 3 years in that most western area, Area 1. We've finished the primary eradication treatments there. We've done our surveillance following that this past winter, and we've now shown that in less than 1% of the areas we did surveillance, there are fire ants. In other words, we've knocked them down to at least 99%. We're now doing mop-ups in that area, so it's called clearance activities. We've moved to the next area further east. And in that next area further east, called Area 2, we've accelerated the eradication, so we're doing a trial this year to see if we can collapse those eradication treatments into 1 year, not 3. So we're doing our best to get better at doing this, to learn how to attack these ants in a way that they're not prepared for. So this map just shows you, and you can see this map on our website, on the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries website. We release this every month, we update it every month. It's where fire ants have been found and killed in the last 3 months. Anywhere there's a detection or report of fire ants, we will go and we'll kill those ants. Or it may be that now, and I'll talk to you about this later, anybody who has a piece of land with fire ants on it can kill their own fire ants. They don't have to wait for us. The same as they might kill any other pest on their property, they can now do that with fire ants. So you'll see Logan's in the middle of the hotspot. It's something that we need to deal with. It's not in the eradication area, so the eradication area will move to Logan, but it's going to take a couple of years for that to happen. We have to have ways to deal with the fire ants in the meantime. Something that wasn't, I think, evident to people at the beginning of this 10-year program we have that started in 2017. So there were programs before 2017. This new program was really a dedicated effort by the country to deal with these fire ants once and for all by giving us 10 years to get rid of them and giving us $411 million over that time to eradicate them. But one of the things that happened behind the scenes, and this happened the year before this new program started, was there was a new Biosecurity Act came into force. So it says it's Biosecurity Act 2014, it came into force 2016, and associated regulations. That act says that anybody who's got what's called biosecurity matter, and fire ants are called Class 1 restricted biosecurity matter. So anyone who's got fire ants on their property, they have a responsibility for that land. They have a responsibility to make sure that they mitigate the risk. And that would mean mitigating the risk of someone being stung and mitigating the risk of them spreading to somebody else. So that's already there. What we had to do is remove some impediments to that. One of those was the ability for people to use the chemicals and the bait that we use to kill fire ants. The permits for those prevented anybody outside of the program using them. We have removed that impediment. We've also removed the impediment for professional pest managers, the people who might come and kill your cockroaches and spiders. They can now kill fire ants, and we have trained more than 300 of them. So we're now prepared. The bait is available in many places, but we're dealing with the chemical industry to make it more widely available. So we call this self-treatment or self-management. It's something that is very multidimensional because it's not just about one party or one set of stakeholders. It's about anybody who's in the fire ant area who's got fire ants, enabling them to do something about it, and us helping people to understand what they can do. So we have pilots going, now have pilots with schools, with sports and recreational facilities. There are some in Logan City Council area. Waste facilities are important. People take fire ant infested material to waste facilities. They need to be treated to make sure they don't spread from there. We have had examples of significant spread of fire ants from some waste facilities. Building and development sites in particular, developers create an environment that fire ants love. And so I'll talk about, we would ask council to do everything they can, everything you can, to make sure any development site and any development contractor that you have is doing their best to mitigate the risk of fire ants. So it's to prevent them from moving in and to deal with them if they are there. We've also got some community pilots. So, people who are in residential areas, they can treat their own backyards, but they really need to do that together in unison. So we're going to have some whole suburb pilots, and one of them is in Yarrabilba. That will be coming soon. So it's not moved to the next one. Now it has. So what can council do? So you already help us with the National Eradication Program. You support us. We get great support from Logan City, and we're really appreciative of that. You help us to spread the word in spreading our communications and your communications. That's important. I had a group of stakeholders out at Bow Desert yesterday who said one of the best ways for them to get messages was things attached to their rate notice. These are farmers, they don't go looking at social media very much. People think that social media is the way to get to everybody. Well, there are other ways to get to people. Fire ant awareness training, so you have people who are out in the field all the time, people who manage property. You've got pest and weed managers. If they know what fire ants look like, they can deal with them at the time that they find them. Of course, we want people to still tell us about fire ants. We want them still reported to us, but we don't have to come and kill them. Anybody who's got them can kill them themselves. So we do self-management training. Some council staff have been trained. As I said, professional pest managers have been trained, and we're happy to train anybody who wants to be trained, and the training is free. We also notice that some councils' biosecurity plans doesn't recognise the changes to the new Biosecurity Act that have been in place for 4 years now. They only talk about reporting fire ants, not actually dealing with them. So we would work with you to have that change. We've recently done that with Gold Coast City Council. As I said, construction and documents around obliging people involved in construction to deal with fire ants is really important. There may be an opportunity to use planning schemes and codes to oblige people to deal with fire ants. We do have, obviously, our Biosecurity Act, but there are other ways to oblige people in a very clear way what they need to do. Talked about council now expanding their pest and weed management to include fire ants. It's just another pest. And I talked about waste management. So that's it in a nutshell. I think I'll just open it up to questions, really, because it's what you don't know that I want to help you with.
Thank you so much for your time and information today. I'd like to open the floor to councillors for discussion, and I've got Councillor Lane first.
Thanks very much through you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Should a person or landowner proactively treat their property ahead of any infestation? Should we be encouraging people to do it now across a wide-scale spread so that before they find any sort of fire ants? And how long does it last normally, the treatments?
Yes, that's a really good question. So the ideal way to deal with fire ants is to proactively bait a piece of land on a regular basis until we turn up to do eradication. So eradication is pretty clear. Once we've done eradication treatments, there should be no fire ants ever again. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have to eradicate large areas at a time so they don't reinfest. So you can treat your property, but the surrounding properties might not be treated and they can come in. What you do is you keep baiting on a regular basis, and even those new entrants to your property will be killed before they establish. What we would do is encourage people to look at the map on our website to see if there are fire ants near them. So even if they don't have fire ants, they might want to treat. Once you see a fire ant nest, the chances are there are more you can't see. And we know during dry times, which we have at the moment, that fire ants tend to go to ground, so you don't see many mounds, and then all of a sudden there will be a rain event and all these mounds pop up and people think, oh, I've suddenly become infested. They were there for quite some time. So it is a good question.
Thank you. And the second part is if a person is looking to bait, where do they find the information on what the bait is? I mean, you go to Bunnings and there's 50 types of everything, so...
Yeah, so there's, on our website, they can get all the information about how to treat fire ants and what are the baits. We've worked with Bunnings in particular. So they've got some training happening so their staff understand what the fire ant baits are. But all of the ant treatment on the shelves at Bunnings has a label on it, and on that label it says what it can and can't kill. And there are currently 2 or 3 products on Bunnings shelves that can treat fire ants. So normal fire ant dust, those sorts of things that you sprinkle on your footpaths for the little brown ants coming out the cracks, that won't kill fire ants. It's got to be properly certified fire ant bait. And we are working with the chemical industry to encourage them to expand the range of products and bait types to be able to kill fire ants. The program in the past 15 years or so, because it prevented anybody else from killing fire ants, really constrained that market. So we were the market for fire ant bait. We are now working to expand that out so that not just people in residential areas, but farmers also, who know how to spread fertiliser and know how to kill other pests, we want them to be killing fire ants on their properties.
Sorry, one last question. Sorry, Madam Chair. We've got a lot of people who've got their own home gardens and they've got fruit and veg gardens in their backyards. Do the baits impact native fauna? Do they impact their veggie gardens? Is it detrimental to them to put it around or close to their gardens or their animals?
So the label on the bait container will say what is the way to use it. So food that you would eat, so if it was food you're going to harvest off the plants, you would make sure you kept the bait away from that. So you don't have to use much bait. It's a very, very low density of bait that you put on the ground. It needs to be on the ground because the ants forage, pick it up, take it back into the nest, and that's where it will kill the workers and the queens. In terms of toxicity bait, it depends on what it is. Some baits are more toxic to other insects than others. The main bait we use is an insect growth regulator. It essentially makes the queen ant sterile, and it's very specific to ants and mostly fire ants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Fraser.
Councillor Lane stole my question.
Already covered.
Good morning. I was wondering if alternate means of killing ants is recommended, because I had a lot of people on Facebook saying, oh, you've got to put this and that on the nest, and people were talking about more or less burning them, but that wouldn't be recommended, I'd imagine. But is there anything off the shelf that people have used that would be effective, or you just would recommend only the baits that you can purchase?
Another good question. So I did get a report once of a property, I think it was in Chambers Flats. They had horses there that would be in trouble by the fire ants, so the property owner poured petrol down the mounds and lit it. Definitely not recommended. So there have been some inventions in the US over years about putting hot steam down the nest and all sorts of things. It doesn't really work, and sometimes it's more of a danger to the person than the ants themselves. The baits are the safest. You don't have to actually put them on the nest itself. You can put them around the nest, so you can keep away from the ants. You don't want to get close to the ants. And most of the baits will kill ants in nests you can't even see. So it's like this hidden danger that's there. You put the bait out, they come and get it, they bring it back into the nest, and they're gone. Some of the baits will act faster than others. The one that we use in eradication may take a few months. Others might kill them more quickly. And we will use one of those fast-acting baits if we think there's a danger, for instance, to children in a backyard or in a sporting field. We might use them. The fastest way we can kill them, but you have to be a professional pest manager, is called direct nest injection. So you poke a big rod down the nest, and we put a liquid insecticide in, basically fill the nest up with liquid insecticide, and it pretty well instantly kills everything in the nest.
Okay, and I was wondering, how much does this bait actually cost? Like, does it come in a bag, like a kilo bag, or...?
It's a little shaker, normally, the one that you might get in the hardware. You can get it more in bulk, so if you were a farmer with acreage, then you'd probably go to your produce store and you'd get larger lots of it, and then you'd be able to spread it in ways that you could do on the back of your tractor, for instance. So if it's in a residential backyard, the best thing is a little shaker. It just comes in this plastic bottle thing, you take the top off, it's got little holes in, and you just shake it around. Varying prices depending on what the product is. It's still not as cheap as we would like it to be, again, because the market has been constrained. I think the cheapest that I've seen it is between $30 and $40. It's not as cheap as some of the other ant killers, and we're working hard to deal with that. These pilots that we're running, we supply the bait. And that's part of us getting people up to speed with what to do, and hopefully when we've finished these pilots, the other bait marker will have caught up, and those same products will be available at reasonable retail prices.
Okay, nice. One more question, if that's okay. So,
Go for it.
I've had quite a few residents complain that they've reported a nest on the footpath and no one's actually shown up to do anything in their opinion. Could you let me know like what kind of timeframes we would expect for a response to actually occur?
So it depends on when that happened. If it was 12 to 18 months ago, the program had a large backlog of what we call these responsive treatment requests. So when someone reports fire ants, irrespective of where they are, they would get put in a queue. We would respond to the ones that were a public safety issue first, and normally they would be a 24 to 48 hour turnaround. Because the way the program was dealing with those at the time hadn't changed for many years, it really wasn't keeping up with the demand. So since then, we've radically changed the way we provide that service. We got rid of all the backlog, and our current response rate on all of those calls, no matter what the risk is around 1 business day.
Nice.
So we have a key performance indicator for that, which is no more than, I think, 12 working days, but we try to keep it much shorter than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Thanks for that.
Any more questions? Of course. Councillor Hall.
Thank you for this, Mr. Dudgeon. And I've got a couple of questions, which I'm sure you could possibly find on the website that you have available. But just for the average punter or the average councillor, what would be the identifying features of a fire ant nest? Would it be possible to go out for the average person to go out into their backyard and be able to say, that's a normal ant or bull ant nest or ant nest, and that's a fire ant nest?
Yes. It can be a bit tricky for some people because they expect to see fire ant nests like other nests. So there are a number of ants that make big mounds. Some of the thing that will make it difficult for fire ants is they often will build them in places that's difficult to see them. And so we did have a situation in Springfield Lakes, it was, where a policeman almost died because he was out whippersnippering, didn't see the nest, knocked the top off it, sprayed himself with fire ants and got bitten and went into shock. So sometimes you won't see them. If they're more out in the open, you'll see them. They can be a little mound, so they can be very small, they can be very large. We have seen some the size of a small car in their size. They've been there for a long time. Fire ant mounds have no hole in the top. They don't have an entryway in and out of the top of it. They have little tunnels that go out under the ground that can go out to 30 metres away. So it will be a dome-shaped mound. Sometimes it could be some crumbly soil, especially if it's on the curb, but you won't see the ants coming in and out of that. You might see them foraging around. That's the difference. The other difference is if you do see the ants, they're all different sizes. They're the only ant species you'll see in Australia that is multiple sizes. Pretty well all others are either one size or there's 1 or 2 species that are 2 sizes. They've got a little one and a big one. Well, these are anything from a couple of millimetres to about 6 millimetres. They're really small. So people think they're these really big things with these massive, great big chompers on them. They're not. They're tiny little copper-coloured ants.
Another question, and I'm not sure if you might be able to answer this, but we've got another humble little pest that's been annoying Queensland for a long time. He's known as the Queensland cane toad. Do Queensland cane toads assist in any way in controlling fire ant numbers, or are fire ants getting rid of our cane toad problem?
Yes, there has been some discussion about can we get them to kill each other. That would be really good. I would think the cane toads would lose the war against fire ants every time. Certainly small amphibians just have no chance against fire ants. But they're only in southeast Queensland, and they don't target cane toads. So if there's other things to eat, they're going to eat that. They'll forage for that rather than cane toads. Cane toads probably just unlucky to be killed by fire ants rather than be targeted.
And just one more question. Are fire ants more common in our bushland locations, or where when we have open, open plain backyard fields with exposed earth? Which are they more common in?
Open areas. They love open areas. They go straight to disturbed areas. They come from South America, and that's the sort of area that they have evolved to. They love turf, including turf farms. They love new developments, nice soil piles. They love mulch. They've been found in potted plants. So that's the other way in which they move around. So they can fly up to 5 kilometres. That's one of the issues with them spreading. But also they can hitch a ride in some of what we call these high-risk carriers. So it can be soil, gravel, mulch, hay, and they can move large distances if we don't control that. So those products that are moving from the fire ant area, we have to deal with that. But we find that they have an innate ability to find these areas that you're talking about, the more open areas. The way that they colonise new areas is that the queens are fertilised by the males in flight in the air above existing nests, up to 100 metres in the air, and then they will go flying and they will target these open areas.
Understood. And how would you say Assistive has drones been in combating the fire ant problem?
Sorry, has what been?
Drones, our
Drones.
drones.
So we're not using drones yet. We do use helicopters. So most of our eradication in the west anyway has been with helicopters. Drones is something that we're looking at. It's one of these things where we may look at drones for residential areas, but there are some CASA rules around that, and you don't want to drop bait on people or their pets or in their pools. So there may need to be some restrictions around how we do that. But yes, drones is one of the things we're looking at. We're also looking at other ways to kill fire ants that isn't about chemicals and baits. So we have a project with University of Queensland to look at a genetic intervention. It's called gene silencing. For instance, if we could silence the gene for worker ants to go and forage, then they don't go looking for food, and eventually the nests will die out. So that's a pretty extreme example of what we might be able to do. But those genetic interventions, we haven't got any successful biocontrols yet, because we don't want a cane toad problem associated with some predator for fire ants. So we are looking as broadly as we can at innovative ways. We also have a remote sensing capability. So we had a first generation that we used up until a couple of years ago. We've now developed a new generation that's about to go operational, and that's for us to go looking for fire ants over large areas. And that remote sensing, it's world-leading remote sensing, and it has centimetre accuracy.
So you mentioned before that CAS is kind of preventing the use of drones to combat in this situation at the moment. Is that right?
They're not preventing it, but the current CASA restrictions would probably cause us problems, and we'd have to negotiate some changes to that in many of the circumstances that we would need to use drones.
Yeah, I believe there needs to be some changes with CASA as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got another question from Councillor Fraser.
Yeah, sorry, last question. So if a resident was to report a fire ant nest today and it was to get treated tomorrow, do you guys now ring up that resident or let them know by email or something that you've been out and how you've treated the nest, and to some instructions of some sort, or does it just happen and no one gets told what's been going on?
No, well, preferably they're there at the time to show us where the ants are. If they're not there, we'll still turn up and treat them, and we'll leave a leaflet. Not only do we do that, if it's an area where there hasn't, we haven't had a lot of action there, we'll go and do a letterbox drop around all of the residents in that area to let them know that we've treated fire ants in the area, for them to go and have a look and ring us if they find them. So we're much more proactive than we used to be, and we certainly let people know what's going on so that they can help us with what's happening with fire ants.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Thank you for the questions, everyone. Thanks so much for all of the great information.
Thank you very much.
So, apologies, I am a little bit lost. Okay. All right, I think I have this. Thanks. Councillors, the recommendations are in the report and are on screen in front of you. Is there a mover for this motion? Councillor Hall, and a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Lane. Do any councillors like to speak to the motion?
I'd like to speak through the chair. I think this is something that council really has to look at carefully, because this could impact the lives of many residents if it gets out of control. You know, people often talk about the safety and security of their children and their pets. If fire ants do get out of hand in Logan, it will impact the safety of our children and their pets. So we need to do as much as we can to, you know, try and control this issue. It's not like Lantana, which will just stay on a fence or in your backyard. This can go into our kids' playgrounds, it can go into their play areas, and it can go into their schools. So I think it's very important for council to align with the fight against fire ants and look at ways to address these issues. I think drone technology might be something that council may be able to assist in, but we'll need to work with CASA in terms of what we can do to put them out there.
Thank you. And Mr Mansfield, is there anything that you would like to add?
Thank you. I'd just like to speak to the recommendations. The key recommendation is succinctly per Councillor Hall's comments there. We will deliver a further report back to committee and council detailing options about how we can increase our role in the fire ant management space. A lot of stakeholder managers in the public gallery and have been invited to hear the presentation directly from Mr Graham Dudgeon. So that is a key report, but also importantly, a second key recommendation is endorsing myself and Andrew, the Graffiti Pest Services Program Leader, our role in terms of working with Biosecurity Queensland with the Yarrabilba pilot, which is an enormous litmus test in terms of the future directions of self-management. Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks so much. Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much to you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, Shane and Andrew. If a person is in a rental property and they think that they've discovered fire ants, but they probably can't afford the baits, is there a program which council can assist, or have we looked at that in the past?
Currently, no.
Yeah, essentially, Councillor Lane, all treatment of fire ants has been undertaken by Biosecurity Queensland. As they said, the regulations controlling the use of bait has been restricted until just recently. So the program has been entirely theirs, and they've responded to customer requests. We've assisted with the identification so that a resident who didn't want to bother BQ could ask us to identify first of all. Into the future, I can see that we can assist more greatly with advice to residents of all sorts.
That is great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now open the floor to vote. All of those in favour, please raise your hand. Yes. The motion is being carried unanimous. Thanks so much. That's our first one. I now refer to item 4.2. Before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I now refer to the City Standards and Animal Care Manager to open public discussion. Mr Mansfield, you may proceed.
Thank you. This is an exciting report. It's the finalisation of a local lawmaking process under the Local Government Act, where we have increased the fines for people parking in disability bays without a permit. Effectively, we've followed the local lawmaking process. The final stage, per the recommendations, is really the gazettal and the provision of all of the documentation to the state. The law will become effective on the date of gazettal, which is roughly the Friday the 12th of December. open to any questions. More importantly also, it's aligned succinctly to our access and disability inclusion plan. Thank you very much, councillors.
Thank you, Mr Mansfield. This report's timely with tomorrow being the International Day of People with Disability. I'll now open to the floor for councillors for discussion, and I've got one already from Councillor Lane.
Yeah, you can't shut me up today, Madam Chair. A quick one, Shane. If, say, a person is out taking their mother to an appointment and that said mother forgot her disability parking thing, and they get hit with this fine, they can present it at a later date and as proof that they were doing that, because my mother is want to forgetting her disability sticker whenever we go somewhere. So I just thought I'd ask for other people.
We have a very seamless review process that expediently resolves those issues. We understand people typically who have disability parking permits sometimes may forget to display the permit, so we have a very good process for those issues to be resolved very quickly.
Thanks, Shane.
Councillor Hall.
Shane, just a quick question. With these changes in terms of the fine or the penalty being a bit higher, do we have anything in place to update our existing parking bay recognition? I know, like in my division, I've made effort to update some of the disabled parking just so people are more aware where they actually are, to prevent people accidentally parking in disabled sections. Is there anything that council's rolling out to do this, just to help people recognise what are actually the disability parking bays, and perhaps if some of the lines or the markings have eroded over time, to repaint them so they're easily more recognisable?
Certainly, we will liaise with our roads infrastructure planning branch in that respect. At this point in time, there is no specific program. Our officers are very astute in terms of if there are signs that are faded or if there is line marking that is degraded in any shape or form. Officers don't issue a penalty infringement. We put that into the roads infrastructure planning works process for that to be rectified. If it's on private premises, because we have agreements with the larger shopping centres to enforce disability parking bays in the shopping centre areas, we would liaise with the centre management for those works and for that upgrade to take place. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you for your answer, Shane.
Councillor Bannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through the Chair, I applaud it. It's long overdue. There's no excuse for parking in a disabled bay. It's just poor form. So I'm all for it, mate. Job well done.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Anyone else? In that case, is there a mover for this motion? Mr Mayor, and seconder, Councillor Murphy. Do any councillors wish to speak to the motion? I now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. The motion is being carried unanimously. I'll now refer to item 4.3. Before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I now refer to the City Standards and Animal Care Manager to open public discussion. Mr Mansfield, you may proceed.
Thank you, councillors. This report proposes some possible amendments to our local law provisions to do with election signs. The election signs local law was last reviewed in 2015, primarily in response to considerations on freedom of political communication that were evolving in particular courts at that time. The report goes further to recommend the initiation of a local law amendment process. The key theme to this report is council must really be cognisant of the regulations in the Local Government Act. We can regulate, we cannot prohibit, but also, as I just alluded to, in terms of High Court precedent, the implied right of freedom of political communication. Our current law is fully compliant with the Local Government Act, and also it has a clear and legitimate purpose to serve the purposes of political communication rights, and that is the key theme of public health and safety and road safety, which is our primary role and responsibility in terms of this local law. There are, from my view, the amendments are quite minor. The criteria C, as I've explained in the report, has an extensive example explanatory. We're fine-tuning some of those examples, adding some examples, but also including a new provision which may be a criteria E in the future with respect to the time period for election signs to be displayed on roads. I take the report as read and happy to answer any questions specifically.
Thank you, Mr Mansfield. Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much, Shane. I was reading this report with interest, and one of the things that I'm most concerned about is when we ran for council, there was a specific set of guidelines that we had to follow, and like other candidates, I found myself in the wrong spot at the wrong time with some of my signs, and council scored those. But my biggest concern about this is that it feels like it's a bit of a shut the gate after we got in mentality with respect to these laws, that they clamp down on any future candidates in terms of being a bit more restrictive. I know that some people don't like signs littering the side of the road, and I note that there was some instances during mainly in the local government campaign, where candidates went overboard in the closeness to intersections and things like that they put their signs. But I'm just very concerned that it will appear and will have the appearance of we're shutting the gate after we got in, and we're not being fair to future candidates in respect of how and where they can display their signs.
The proposals are all about regulation and enhancing that finer component in terms of clarity, to be clear, which is very important in a local law for public health and safety and traffic safety. The only substantial change is the time period for displaying on a roadway, road reserve, etc. The examples that align to criteria C are really about enhancing it, and there's no real shut the gate process. It's really about improving through experience and to ensure officers are clear, and also the customer, the people displaying the signs, are clear comprehensively, so we don't have any issues.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed that you also put some examples of where traffic safety might be a concern in terms of waivers. Now, I had a number of waivers assisting me, and I was quite grateful for their assistance. It would be at the discretion of the person who is coming to investigate those complaints as to whether or not it fell into any of those examples, or whether, a good example is down on Wembley Road, there's a bunch of people in the last state campaign that were in between the service road and Wembley Road. And some could say that they were impeding traffic or distracting them, but the reality is so was the big flippy air sign, 200 metres down the road. So,
and that's the objective of that amendment, to make it clear in terms of safety. It's not acceptable, and I appreciate. I've heard reports on that. Those types of activities tend to be quite transient and short term, and very difficult to enforce, without a doubt. And it would be a difficult task for officers to be across the city to catch every activity in that respect happening. However, it's all to do with communication up front, alerting candidates, anyone who inquires, to have all the information out there, and again to enhance those examples that align to the clear criteria in the local law for the regulation.
And would those laws extend to businesses who get children and teenagers out into the side of the road waving signs for their businesses?
Currently, we don't have a local law for that. We've discussed that previously. There is a permit system in the traffic regulation, and we haven't done an autopsy in terms of that department, how they manage that. There is some information that it's not managed, and there is some information that it is. For the purposes of this report, we wanted to focus on clearly what we can clearly do. To introduce a permit system would be that additional burden, and you'd be then encroaching on implied rights of freedom of political communication. So we have to be very careful
Yeah.
in balancing and constructing this local law amendment.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. We've now got Councillor Bannon, followed by Councillor Power, Councillor Heremiah and Councillor Stemp. So Councillor Bannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The display of election signs before and after election, I'd be more inclined to 4 weeks. There's nothing the community hate more than people putting out 100,000 signs 6 months out before the election. It's when people get bored and they get sick of seeing them. It just makes the whole area look ugly. I've only ever really put them out 28 days, but I know other people put them out, 6 months before. So I really think that's a good thing. And I know Teresa, Councillor Lane might correct me, but I think its state was 28 days from the elections called, I think.
No, they just chose to do that.
Oh, they just played the game right. As for waving on the side of the road, you're never going to see me standing on the side waving a sign. But I'll keep out of that one. But yeah, I do definitely agree with the shorter term before the thing. Just there's nothing worse than 3-6 months out and the whole suburb's covered in signs on fences. It just makes the whole place look trashy, and the public just do not like it.
Thank you, Councillor. We've nominated 6 weeks on the basis that it does seem reasonable, and there is an alignment with some other local governments. And it's whether you would be subject to challenge by only making it 4 weeks is really a crystal ball type of exercise. However, we are recommending 6 on that basis. I'm pretty sure it is.
Through the chair, that's just my opinion. I'm at the mercy of the other councillors. I'm pretty cruisy either way, but the shorter the period, the better for me, because I think they're very ordinary things to have sticking up everywhere. But I'm in a beautiful rural area in Division 9, mate, with great scenery.
Oh, there you go.
Here we go.
Mayor Power.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was always going to guarantee that there would be quite a lot of discussion on something that affects us. So I predicted this, and it always has been. Can I say, with all the years of experience that I've had with elections, things have become, well, let's just say that we're just about at the Wild West situation at the moment. When I was first elected, we had control in that it was 20 signs each. They were the smaller signs. You had to register with the council the particular location that you were putting them there. If you moved them from one location to another, you had to get permission to do that before you did it. There was officers around checking to see that you only had the 20 signs. There was none of this street waving business. It was pretty respectable. And then, of course, we had the Liberal Party challenge, which sort of threw all the rules out. And to the point now where it's just anything goes, election time, well, there's no such thing as election time. You can do it all year round. I think this is a good compromise between what we used to have and what we have now. I think this is based on, and according to the report, this is an acceptable under the legislation. So I think this is a great compromise, and I think that we've got to improve the current situation, because I can tell you now, I got a lot of complaints during the election, and I was frustrated because I didn't want to do what the other candidates do, but you feel that you're obliged to do what the other candidates do because you think you don't want to lose, you don't want to give them an advantage, and then it just becomes a blood sport, doesn't it? It's just a free-for-all. And the residents are the ones that misses out, because instead of seeing the lovely landscape, we've got these candidates and their friends and election crew running up and down the street, waving their signs frantically. Please be up to my sign. It's just crazy. I support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I echo those sentiments, but we need to remember that councillors need to be held accountable in elections. And I'm quite concerned within point A about these new examples that have been recommended. Point B, I think it's a good idea limiting the period of time that election signs in roads, so traditional core flutes, would be allowed to be displayed. I think that would make the suburbs a lot nicer and the rural areas a lot nicer and reduce waste and council resources. But within point A, the examples of changing the roadsiders and then changing the current distances from the lanes of traffic, and then editing adding a new example about signs attached to trailers and vehicles. Now that really concerns me, because even though we're councillors, every 4 years we have a job review, and that's called an election, and we need to make sure that not only do we have the ability to get out there to communicate with our people and to make sure that they know what we're doing, but we also need to have the respect to afford our opponents that luxury. And in Australia, it's not a luxury, it's a right of political expression. I'm really concerned that changing road signing examples will limit the ability for candidates, especially in suburban council seats, to get out there and communicate with their electorate. Changing the current distancing of election signs from the nearest traffic lane will reduce people's engagement in our elections, with Logan City already having quite a low turnout compared to Brisbane and the Gold Coast. What we need is people to know their councillors. What we need is for people to know their candidates in seats. And what we need is to make sure that we don't limit democracy in Logan. So my initial thoughts are that point A, those 3 examples, are risky, and I'm initially hesitant. Point B, about the time period regulation, sounds like a good idea. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a comment about roundabouts in terms of waving signs. It's an area that my community have brought to me on many occasions, and I guess when you've got 3 or 4 vehicles coming into a roundabout and you've got a series of people standing on roundabouts, surrounding a roundabout, shaking a sign, wanting you to wave at them, it's an accident waiting to happen. And in my opinion, that is something that needs to be regulated more heavily when it comes to election time, because I really do see it as a safety issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stemp. That's part of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall.
Just a question for the room, except for maybe Councillor Karen Murphy. Who before the election knew who I was? Oh, I sold your house, so obviously you don't know who I am. Yeah, honestly, not many. But you sure as hell knew who I was during the election. And that was because I was able to express my right to advertise myself, what I was about, my policies. People could see my poster on the side of the road or wherever it was, go home, do their research and decide whether or not they wanted to vote for Tony Hall. It is the democratic freedom of someone who wants to run an election campaign to be able to advertise and express who they are. I'm not for anything that takes away democratic freedoms, because it's one more step towards stopping freedom of speech, freedom of expression. These fundamental things that we really value as Australians. For me, while I was learning how to advertise myself, I found it quite confusing on some of the things that were on the council websites, and I found it quite easy to understand the Electoral Commission. So I followed what was on the Electoral Commission in terms of how I advertise myself. I believe when you have 2 different descriptions of what you must do, it becomes very difficult for someone to understand exactly what they can and what they can't do. My current understanding of the system is it currently aligns with the policies and the law of the Electoral Commission, and changing some of those things, it's not guaranteed, but we may actually run into legal trouble. Is that right?
Just to answer your question, my understanding is the Electoral Commission website refers election signs to the respective council or local government. From what I've read, there's no specific. They regulate a whole raft of other matters to do with elections, but in terms of the specific election signs, my understanding is they refer you to the local government or the council, and we base our local law on the Local Government Act. We don't prohibit, we regulate, and also we are also obliged to be very cognisant of legal precedent in terms of court actions. These proposed amendments, I'm confident, serve a reasonable, appropriate and clear purpose that balances everything. I think this is a great outcome in terms of clarity for council and the customer who wishes to display an election sign. Councillor Hall, thank you.
Yeah. Do you believe that any of these changes could increase our chances of legal ramifications?
As I just said, I'm of the view that any proposal here is reasonable, number one, is appropriate and serves a clear purpose, so therefore balances in terms of public health and safety, and traffic obstruction issues that it is managing, would not be, doesn't cross that line of implied right of freedom of political communication.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Wilcox, Councillor Fraser, Councillor Russell, and then Councillor Haramiah. And after that, maybe we might start heading towards a motion.
Thank you. I think I'm in the opposite end. I would like it actually to be more heavily regulated. I don't like waving signs, and I will never go stand on the side of the road and wave signs at people. I know that the people in my community don't like it, and they all say it to me all the time, don't do it, or we'll, give you obscene gestures and stuff like that. So I know I'm just not going to do it. But each to their own. But I would actually like to know, and I note that in some of the other LGAs, that you're only allowed a certain amount of signs on polling booths on polling day, which I think would be awesome. We did it on our pre-polling booths, where we were only allowed a couple of, I think one sign each or something, which I think worked wonderful. And I think in here it's got on some polling booth days you're only allowed 4 signs. I think that's perfect. I think that's great. One thing I am concerned about is if we're allowed to put our signs out 6 weeks out of polling day or election day, technically, how do we know when that 6 weeks is if the election hasn't been called? Generally, it's only called 4 weeks out. So that's my concern. So for me, I would say either you're allowed to put them out the day that nominations close or the day that the election is called, because for me, it's a bit grey. I know it's a set date, but technically it will get called. So that's my only concern. I know it's a set date in March, but technically, if something happens, it won't get called. I don't know. Heaven forbid another COVID hits. Because I don't like driving down the street. So this is why I'd like it more heavily regulated with how many signs we're allowed out. Because Moreton Bay says they're only allowed 60 to 300 signs, depending on whether it's local, state, federal, or a mayoral candidate. I would like it, to come down to local. And I've got the biggest division out of all of us. And I would be quite fine with having 50 signs out. Not having 100 signs out, I would be quite fine with that. Because I don't like driving down and seeing, especially on the T intersection of Cusack Lane and Teviot Road, about 20 different divisional signs and that sort of thing. I think it just looks terrible, and that sort of thing. So I would like it to see it even more heavily regulated by us, but I know that will not be liked by some and that sort of thing. So,
sorry, Councillor Wilcox, have you got a question?
For me, I would like it either we put our signs out either when nominations close or when they call the election, not 6 weeks. 6 weeks for me is a bit grey.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Fraser. Let's keep it tight, please.
So yeah, Councillor Hall actually asked one of the questions that I had, so I'll ask one of the others. So in one of the recommendations it says a person must not hold or wave the election sign in a way that distracts motorists or obstructs or is likely to obstruct pedestrian or bicycle movement. So I plan to actually wish all my residents Merry Christmas starting from tomorrow morning. And if I'm waving with a sign that says Merry Christmas from Councillor Tim Fraser, I suspect that would somewhat distract drivers. So if anyone was to report me, would that get me into a bit of trouble, or would I be told to move along or something, in your opinion?
I'll answer that in three ways. Number one, what you're displaying may not constitute an election sign. Number two, we don't regulate people holding and waving signs for any other purpose currently, and also for election signs. It's certainly not defined. Certainly Queensland Police may have an interest in that because they have powers and responsibilities. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I've got a quick question for you, Mr Mansfield. I just wanted to just check, so I'm concerned a little bit about point 3. Is this specific to sign waving? I'm just a little bit concerned about where one would draw the line between distracting to motorists and attracting attention, which is what signs are intended to do.
Okay. Well, the authorised officer who views the actual event has to be sure that there is a public health and safety issue and also a traffic safety issue. Predominantly, if it's at an intersection or close to the road in any shape or form, there may be a significant risk, and that may be an issue if this was to be enforced. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Actually, no. I'm still sorry. No, I mean it is a good answer to the question, but I'm maybe worried that the language might leave a bit of room for opinion. And in elections, there are a lot of varied opinions from different candidates about what constitutes correct behaviour or not.
Certainly, I appreciate that, and that's why our local law is beautiful in terms of having almost a page of examples to be absolutely clear. It's not exhaustive because there are incidents, there are events happen that you simply cannot legislate or write the example for to be an actual example in our local law. You need to empower the authorised officer to make an on-the-spot public health and safety decision and a traffic safety call for that particular event. To restrict and to define every single event is quite a difficult task and not good public policy making from my view.
Okay, I can appreciate that. So we might we have an answer to if someone were to complain about a particularly fantastic sign that gained a lot of attention from motorists, would we have a definitive answer to whether or not that would be distracting?
If there was
fantasticness.
If there was a fantastic sign,
yes,
or trailer. What the definition of fantastic sign is. We would always look at public health and safety and traffic safety. That's our role. If a sign is a particular colour, or if a photograph is done particularly well, that's quite superfluous to our assessment. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes and no. Lots of hands going up. I'm sorry, guys. This is going to be a long meeting.
I think the clarification is seeking is that are dinosaurs discriminated against in this instance?
It depends what is on the dinosaur at the end of the day.
Big green one.
Is it,
okay, guys.
Test number one, is it an election sign or is it not an election sign? Is it an attachment that may attract the interest of Transport and Main Roads or Queensland Police for another issue?
All right, thank you. We've got one more, which is Councillor Harrimeyer, I think might like to wrap things up, and then we might move on to a vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question's to Mr Mansfield. So you've mentioned that the local law is beautiful and it's clear. and you've also mentioned the role of examples and criteria. When the local law defines what an election sign is or isn't, does it give examples or does it give clear-cut criteria?
The election sign is defined in the Local Government Act, and I'm pretty sure we have that in the report. No, we may not. I can provide that either way.
So it gives
But it's
clear criteria.
Sorry?
So the Local Government Act gives clear criteria as to what an election sign is and as to what an election sign is not.
It's drafted in terms of the subordinate local law currently. The definition of an election sign would be in there. I think that's actually in the head of power of local law. I didn't actually put that in the report, but I'm happy to convey that to elected members. It would be read across the Local Government Act, the local law and the subordinate local law, and I can provide you how that links and provide that to you, Councillor.
It would be good to get a copy of that. And from my previous readings, it's really good to have criteria for definitions. And my concern about point 1 within 1A is that we don't have a definition for what distracting a motorist is. Now, Councillor Russell pointed out very well that the point of election signs is to attract attention. There's no definition as to what distracting motorists is and is not. Is a glance a distraction? Is a dinosaur a distraction? What is a distraction? It's not defined. It doesn't set any clear criteria, and it leaves it up to subjective assessment that hasn't been mentioned in the local law or any attachments to this report.
It is explained. Criteria C, as I explained earlier, the current local law has a page of examples that provide examples that inherently provide real-life situations to what is acceptable and not acceptable. Not exhaustive, because there will be particular situations that we may not even be thinking of at this particular point in time. My answer to the councillor with respect to the dinosaur, I do remember seeing that. It did attract my attention. However, I can't recall if it was specifically an election sign or not, or whether it was some other part of a vehicle or trailer. That was my answer to that question.
And that's why having criteria and definitions in local laws increases public trust in government, and giving examples causes confusion, as Councillor Hall mentioned, and it causes a level of distrust. I believe if we pass these 3 examples, there will be a level of distrust of this council in terms of changing election signs very early in the term. I believe my community's expectations is that a time period for which an election sign can be displayed is acceptable and in line with their views and expectations of council, but these 3 examples are not in my view. That is all, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for a really robust debate and discussion. I'm hearing some hesitance around some elements. I do believe that there is a possibility that we could receive the report as opposed. Is that the case? Okay, so is there a mover for the motion as it stands on the screen? Councillor Bannon? Is there a seconder? Mayor Power?
Can you scroll down so I can read the rest again?
I now open the floor to vote. Oh, sorry. Would any councillors wish to speak to the motion? I now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, I'll go around the room. So Sorry, please keep your hands up. Oh, sorry. Mayor Power is 4. Councillor Lane?
4.
Councillor Hall?
Abstain.
Councillor Fraser?
Against.
Councillor Haramiah?
Passionately against.
Councillor Bannon?
4.
Councillor Stemp?
4.
Councillor Wilcox?
Against. I'd like to see more stuff added.
4.
Thank you, and I'm against. Sorry, where are we at?
Against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're tied.
You are the chairperson, so you have to cast them. They're not going to come back.
We got 5 against 4.
They got 1 carried.
So
2, 3, 4. So Mindy's a casting vote.
An alternative.
Is she voted yes? It was carried.
to another committee, or is it that you want to
5 to 5.
No, it's 5 against 4.
I think to see it. Yeah. I don't think we've got an alternative. An alternative motion prepared.
If we don't change it now.
I think it would be best to defer to a future committee meeting.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. It seems that we have a tie, and as the chair with the casting vote, I'm voting against it. It's been lost. Sorry, Councillor Wilcox.
I am more than happy to change it to for it if I'm able to, and then I can work from there if this can get passed.
There is the opportunity for this to be deferred to a future committee so that it could be worked on.
Yep.
It was 5 against 4.
So do you maintain against?
Yep, I'll defer.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. So the motion has been lost and this report will be deferred to a future committee. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to propose,
that the matter, sorry.
I'd like to propose that the matter be deferred to a later date.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Wilcox, thank you. And would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councillor Wilcox?
In a future committee, I would like to see more added. That's why I voted against it. I liked it, but I would like to see more added so that we can regulate it even further. I don't think there was enough in it. I think it was still not specific enough, and I would like to see it more specific.
Thank you. I now open the floor to vote. All those in favour of this one, please raise your hand. So we'll go through again. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry, please raise your hand if you're for again. Councillor Haramiah, were you against or abstained?
Against.
Thanks.
Against.
Against. Okay, the motion has been carried. So that marks the end of the City Standard and Animal Care Managers reports. Are there any general business? And Mr Mansfield, do you have any comments for the councillors?
No, thank you.
There being none, I'll now move on to the next item. Thank you for your time today, Mr Mansfield. I'll now refer to item 6.1, which is apparently on page 78 of your agendas. Can the Community Services Manager, Mr Nick Maguire, please enter the conversation? Before we begin discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I now refer to the Community Services Manager to open public discussion. Mr Maguire, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors. This morning we're presenting to you for your consideration a copy of our Hooning Action Plan, and shortly I'd like to pass to Councillor Heremiah as the Chair of the Hooning Task Force to say a few words about the report. But firstly, before I hand over to Councillor Heremiah, just in relation to the process, I'd firstly like to acknowledge the fact that we commenced this process about 6 months ago when councillors instigated a conversation during the budget process for the development of a Hooning Action Plan to look at how we as a local government can work with other stakeholders to address the serious antisocial behaviour of hooning across the community. So I'd like to acknowledge the leadership role that councillors played in instigating this process and also the support and leadership that councillors displayed to us as officers in the way that we've worked together to work with other external stakeholders in the development of the Hooning Action Plan to date. So on that note, I'd like to hand to Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, please, Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I'd like to say a few short words on the report. So we've had 2 Hooning Task Force meetings so far, and they've both been a massive success. We've had Queensland Police, we've had parliamentary representatives, we've had subject matter experts, we've had on-the-ground experienced people, and we've had our council colleagues all together in one room, sharing information, having amazing discussions, and working on what you see in this report today, the Hooning Action Plan. Now, the Hooning Action Plan separated how council should dedicate the $250,000 in funding into 2 phases. The first phase is in this financial year, the second phase is in the next financial year. Now, we have 5 main priority areas that the task force identified, how our city can help in reducing hooning. These are advocacy, enforcement, target hardening, education, and technology. These priority areas and the associated funding has had unanimous support from the task force. This action plan is a really good start, and I'd like to thank the task force, the QPS, TMR, our parliamentary representatives, our work group, the community services team, and my council colleagues for their great contribution, their hard work, and their really, really great discussions at the task force so far. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your kind words. Do any other councillors like to enter the discussion? Oh, sorry, I have actually already got Councillor Lane, but I will also add you, Councillor Hall.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm not sure whether this should go to Councillor Heremiah or whether it should go to Nick. As part of the action plan, you've got advocate to the state government to make changes to existing legislation to place the onus of proof on the owner of a vehicle to identify the driver of a vehicle involved in a hooning offence. On the 6th of September, Min Circular 90669, high-tech attack on hoons. Government is looking to expand existing laws, including shifting the onus of proof onto the vehicle owner. This means if the owner claims they weren't driving the vehicle at the time of the offence, it would be up to them to prove it. These are going to be the strongest states in the nation. So the advocacy portion of that report, we're looking at doing something that's already on track to be delivered through legislative change. When the action plan was done up, I'm just wondering whether or not QPS did in fact provide some information around those proposed legislative changes.
Through you, Madam Chair. Absolutely. So as part of that conversation, QPS have made us aware of the different conversations that are going on within the government about proposals to change the legislation. But I think that the message that was coming out of the task force is that essentially at this point in time, that legislation still needs to be changed. So there's still a role for council in partnership with our state government partners to continue to reinforce the importance of changing that legislation to put the onus back onto the vehicle owner. So while some great progress has been made by the state and some commitments have been made by the government, I think there's still an important role for government to play in continuing to advocate for that change to the legislation until we actually see it materialise.
No, fair call, but I think a ministerial circular saying that that's what they're going to do is pretty much a guarantee that that's going to happen. The second thing is investigate the cost benefit of and subsequently advocate for the increasing options for easier legal disposal of used tyres from tyre selling businesses. Example, free disposal at council landfill sites. One of the main things that young Hoons do is they buy second-hand tyres. So the slashing of the tyres is the most reasonable example at the disposal site and the replacement site to stop this practice from happening. They burn out their tyres, leave them on the side of the road, put their regular tyres back on, and off they trot home. So is that something that the task force has considered as part of its advocacy strategy?
Through you, Madam Chair, and I could probably pass to some of the councillors on the task force on this as well, but I think there was a really strong discussion around what can be done with second-hand tyres, used tyres, and I guess part of the key word in that action there is about investigating those sorts of options just to see what we can actually legally do and what we can do in partnership with our colleagues in the waste area, but also in those sorts of businesses that are in the business of selling second-hand tyres. So there's a real sort of commitment there to look at exactly what we can do with second-hand tyres to try to minimise the opportunity for people to get their hands on those used tyres. So I think there's some more exploration work and some more investigation work that needs to be had there as part of that action. But happy for any of the other councillors to make a comment on that as well.
So thank you, through the chair. Councillor Lane, yes, I brought that to the task force, and so did another councillor from another councillor area that has increased dumping of tyres that have been taken from the tyre places. They weren't sold. We do understand that there is social enterprise as well of the second-hand tyres, but what we're trying to stop is the illegal dumping also of those tyres. Particularly in my area, the back of Eagleby, they go down to the wetlands, they'll take those tyres from the tyre manufacturers. So we're in discussion with those tyre companies to say, instead of leaving the tyres out the back and letting these people take them for free, which we end up having to collect out of the wetlands, which costs council a lot of money, is there a step in between where we can stop that happening? So that has been brought forward by the Hooning Task Force. So we're trying to cover all bases to lessen the increase of hooning in our areas and the illegal dumping of tyres.
No, fair call. Thank you so much for that. I think the slashing of a tyre when it's being removed from a vehicle is the best way to ensure that no one can put it on another vehicle to go out and hoon. So just an opinion there.
Thanks, Councillor Hall.
Yes, in terms of advocacy, look, we still have a ways to go. Those laws haven't changed yet, and a lot can happen over time. This is why you need advocacy to keep on those, on the powers that be to get those things changed and make sure they happen in the way that is going to actually support what the outcome of it should be. Now, above who else Jacob has thanked, I'd also like to thank our council officers and staff. Kate Harvey has been a fantastic help. Nick Maguire and Kelly Larson as well. You've helped finesse our crazy ideas. It originally started as RoboCop, and it's turned into something much, much better, I believe, which I strongly believe this will work and will have results for the community. And this is important because for a long time, our residents have suffered with this problem. The reason why they've suffered with this problem is because it takes a collaborative effort to solve a big problem like this. So this task force was essential towards addressing this problem and trying to tackle it. The police couldn't do it on its own. Council couldn't do it on its own. Residents couldn't do it on its own. It takes all of us to work together as a team to make these changes. So I'm very happy this is going forward, and I believe it'll have great results for the community that we can all be proud of.
Thank you. We have a motion on the screen. Do we have a mover for this motion? Councillor Harrimeyer, and a seconder? Oh, that's hard. Oh, Councillor Hall. Thank you. Would any councillors wish to speak to this? Sorry. Would any councillors wish to speak to the motion? There being none, I now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. The motion is being carried. Oh, sorry. So the motion has been carried. Have you abstained or is this against?
Yes, Madam Chair, I will be abstaining because I find it a little bit hypocritical that 3 councillors support this and I understand why they're supporting this, but they're not supporting road safety in election signs.
The motion has been carried. So thank you. That marks the end of the Community Services Managers' reports. Do we have any general business? There being none, Mr Maguire, do you have any comments for the councillors?
Just one thing. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is Keely's last committee meeting before she heads off on maternity leave. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that Keely is coming back. I've been trying to convince her that she could probably come back from maternity leave a lot sooner than what she would like to, but I don't think that I'm going to win that argument anytime soon. But we've also, just to let you know that we've been through a process and we've appointed Erin Simpson, who I think some of you will have met, as the acting program leader while Keely is away. I just want to also just suggest that I'm very fortunate in my branch to have some of the most professional and solutions-focused program leaders across the organisation, and Keely absolutely epitomises that. She's a superstar in our branch and she's a superstar across the community, so I just want to thank her for her work and wish her all the very best of luck in motherhood, which I know she'll be phenomenal at as well because she's great at everything. So,
congratulations, Keely.
And I managed to do that, Madam Chair, without crying, which is a big thing for me.
Aww.
Thank you so much, Mr Maguire. And Keely is well and truly one of the most popular officers around in this building, so we wish you all the very best. Thank you. I'll now refer back to item 5.1, which I believe is on page 65 of your agendas. Can the Sport, Leisure and Facilities Manager, Mr Nigel Brown, please enter the discussions? And before we open discussions on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I note that item 5.1 has a confidential element to the report. This is considered confidential due to the following reasons. Negotiations relating to a commercial matter involving the local government for which a public discussion would likely prejudice the interests of the local government. Do any councillors, I might point out that we don't necessarily need to move into confidential if there's no intent to discuss those elements. Do any councillors wish to move into a closed session for this item? And if applicable, please provide an overview of your intended discussions if it is different to the prepared motion. I remind councillors that if there is no desire to discuss the confidential matters, there's no requirement to move into a closed session. If so, I open the floor to councillors. Okay. Thank you, councillors. I note that the motion, no.
Nigel.
Thank you. I now invite the manager to speak to this.
Thank you. Through the chair. This report was brought to the council back on the 28th of October, at which point a large portion of the report was confidential. I'm very pleased to be able to bring the report back with a majority of the information now made public so that it can be discussed and in the public forum. The work that has been undertaken since this report was last considered was primarily around identifying an alternative access for Larks to continue to have access to the Logan Home Water Pollution Control Centre, where they hold a lease for the delivery of their services. With the works that were to be undertaken at the Water Pollution Control Centre, there was at that point not an identified alternative access. However, with the work of the team since that was last reported, there has now been a temporary access identified, and I'm very pleased to be able to talk to that today.
I would just like to identify that in the recommendations, in recommendation 3, there is a slight error which needs to be corrected in that it refers to provision of funding from Division 11 through the local infrastructure program, and I'm sure Councillor Stent would be very happy to take on that generous offer from Councillor Wilcox. However, that is not the intent, so that we will make that administrative change to recognise that as Division 10. Just speaking briefly to the report, given that it has been discussed before, the main issues as identified was that there is significant works to be undertaken at the Water Pollution Control Centre, impacting on both the access to the Larks site and excuse me, and also disruption to their site for a period of time during construction, which will require them to vacate. With the identification of an alternative access, the opportunity is for them to continue to access the site for a portion of time, and while that still needs to be determined in relation to the permanent access, is still to be determined around land tenure in that precinct. So on that basis, I'm happy just to take any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Brown. I now open the floor to councillors for discussion. Councillor Stamp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just wanted to talk to the report if I could. When I first arrived at council, I received a briefing with regard to Logan Home Radio Control Society and their current lease arrangement, and I was advised there would be future access issues as a result of the wastewater treatment expansion. Since then, I've engaged in many meetings and discussions with council officers in an attempt to find solutions which would enable Larks to remain at their current location in the foreseeable future. I have visited the Larks facilities on a number of occasions, have gained an understanding of the club and have seen them fly their incredible radio control planes. I found out its members are mainly senior gentlemen, but the club is very inclusive, open to all ages and abilities. I've spoken to their families who've told me how this club is their life. I've heard how they run drone programs and bring in drone flyers who would ordinarily be at the local park causing nuisance. And they run programs to teach youth drone skills, which are vital employment skills. I have seen the joy and excitement on the faces of the members when their new plane they've constructed over countless hours is finished and takes its maiden flight. Therefore, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Darryl Riley for coordinating an effort across various branches in council to find a solution which will provide a temporary access route for Larks during the construction phase at the Logan Home Waste Pollution Control Centre, and which will hopefully lead to a longer-term solution once other council matters are resolved. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So is there a mover for the report's motion as displayed on the screen coming up? And of course, Councillor Stemp. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Mayor Power has seconded. Do any councillors wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I'd like to commend Councillor Stemp on her work with this and for advocating for these members of the community. This organisation, if my father was still alive, he would have been a member of this organisation, because my dad used to love anything that had to do with model, miniature or engineering, and this would have been right up his alley, and I believe he would have been proud of you for standing up for these members of the community and letting their voice be heard within council.
Beautiful, thank you. I now open to the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that one's being carried unanimously. That marks the end of the Sport, Leisure and Facilities Manager's report. Is there any general business? Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. Recently, the developers of Everleigh and Greenbank sent through an amendment to EDQ regarding their sporting fields. In their original master plan of their fields, they had specifically said that the fields were to be used for senior athletics as discussed with council officers. However, it was never discussed with local sporting groups and how it would affect those groups, or see if any of them could activate the fields as soon as they were delivered rather than later. After conversations with Rugby League, AFL and other sporting codes in the area, I found that Rugby League was not needed in the area due to close proximity to other clubs, but Division 11 could in fact benefit from an AFL club being based at Everleigh. They would be able to activate the fields immediately when they were delivered, because they have outgrown their current fields, and not to leave them sitting idle whilst waiting for a senior athletics club to utilise the fields. when in fact a senior athletics club is very few and far between in Queensland. And whilst there were discussions with Rugby League wanting to use the fields, other than the Rugby League club is not needed in the area due to being only around 5 kilometres, if that, from the nearest one. Everleigh are wanting council to show their support of changing their field plans so that they can actually now go and redesign to house an AFL field. They've put it into EDQ where it actually states that it is now just parkland, including Sports Oval, but they now need to actually go away and redesign them slightly so that they can put an AFL field there. I would like to put it to my fellow councillors that we show the support in the direction to design the AFL fields for delivery in 2021-2022. I haven't had a resolution written up because I was trying and I didn't get any answers back. So I need a resolution, I believe, on the screen, or a motion or something, so that I can put it to the councillors so that we can show support for Everleigh.
Through the chair, if I may speak to that.
Yep.
My understanding, and apologise for not getting back to you, Councillor Wilcox, is that what you may be able to do today is to call for a future report to be able to present that with a recommendation for consideration by council. I don't believe you can just have a resolution to adopt that without that report. So we can bring a future report.
Yes, please. That would be great. A future report to come through to the January round of committee would be great. Okay.
So do you need words for that? So that the Sport, Leisure and Facilities Manager be requested to provide a report to the meeting of the January, whatever the date of that meeting is, with regards the planning for the Everleigh Sports Park for further consideration by council. Does that sound okay, Councillor Wilcox?
Yep.
Councillors, while we're waiting, can I just suggest that we learn from this in that if we are presenting a general business item and we do want a report up, that we actually talk to the minute clerks about prescribing a resolution to go up. In other words, they've already got the words so that it's just as coarse that you hand over to the minute clerks, she puts it up and then we vote for it. Otherwise, we're wasting too much time.
Can we just specify in there to be held January 2021, detailing the planning for the Everleigh Sports Park, maybe specifically for AFL fields?
Through the chair, what I'd like to bring is the full planning that's taken place and certainly incorporate that option into that report.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion on the screen. Have we got a mover? Thanks, Councillor Wilcox. Do we have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Fraser. I now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that's been carried unanimously. Mr. Brown, do you have any comments for councillors?
No, thank you.
Thank you. There being none, we've reached the end of this meeting's final agenda item, so thank you, Mr. Brown. I note that due to social distancing restrictions, not all managers or staff could attend today. That being said, does anyone have any general business for the Director of Community Services? And have you got something for the councillors?
I do, thank you. Through the chair, just want to wish all the councillors, their family and their constituents a very safe and merry festive season. I acknowledge that it's been such an exciting year and challenging with COVID, everyone coming on board, you know, new mayor and councillors, getting our budget through. And I wish you all a very happy new year. From the Community Services Directorate, we're all excited to work with you for an exciting 2021. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of the council officers and my fellow councillors for their support as I act as chair for my very first time, if you couldn't tell, and express my thanks to the members of the public for their patience as well. That completes our agenda for today. I declare the City Lifestyle Committee meeting of the 2nd of December 2020 concluded at 10:44 a.m. The meeting of the City Governance Committee will commence in 10